Hello everyone, my name is Marianne Guevara. A huge hello and a huge thank you to anyone who's clicking on this video or who's just checking out the channel. Whether you're a new subscriber or an old subscriber, if you're just a visitor, thank you very much for your viewership. So today I'll be doing another review / discussion on my most recent book that I've read, and that would be Observatory Mansions by Edward Carey. So this is Carey's debut novel. It came out in 2000, and here we are following a group of eccentric misfits who live inside this apartment block known as Observatory Mansions, which was once an ancestral home named Tirsham Park. Now, the residents of Observatory Mansions live in this sort of delicate balance where they self-isolate. However, this balance is disrupted when a new tenant arrives. And so our main character, the sort of center of the story, a 37-year-old man named Francis Orme, decides to take drastic measures to return Observatory Mansions to its status quo. Now, I picked up this book primarily due to the fact that I have heard people online liken it to the Gormenghast trilogy by Mervyn Peake. I'm a huge fan of Gormenghast, and so when I heard the comparison, it made my ears prick up, and I decided to give this book a go. And at least from the get-go, from the first few pages, I could see the similarities, particularly in the characters, the way that they're introduced to us. They're very quirky. So, for example, you have one of the tenants is Peter Bug, who is a former schoolmaster, and he uncontrollably cries and sweats. He has shaved all the hair off his body because those are the parts where he sweats the most. And then you have one other tenant like Claire Higg, who is a massive TV addict. She spends her time just glued to the TV. She has snipped pictures of celebrities from magazines and she's pasted them all over her walls. She has a hard time differentiating between fiction and reality. And so, yeah, you have, as I mentioned in the beginning, some eccentric characters. But what I really admire about Carey is that he gives these characters depth. They are complex. And you come to realize as you are reading the book that these quirks are just residual effects of personal tragedies that each of them have gone through. The two major themes that I got out of reading Observatory Mansions was, one, people's fervent desire for human connection, but then also the self-destructive habits that they take on to impose isolation. There's this one scene towards like the middle of the book where you have a group of these tenants congregating in one apartment, and one of them starts talking about their past, which, causes another one to remember and talk a bit about their past as well, causing another one to talk about their past. And so you have a group of people, sharing their experiences, wanting to listen to these experiences, which is something that has never happened in Observatory Mansions. It's basically an anomaly. So in this moment, you see people sharing, you see them connecting, but then at the same time, as they're reminiscing, you see them opening up or reopening old wounds. And you can come to see or understand that the tenants use isolation, they use loneliness as a type of soothing balm, to help them forget about the pain and suffering of the past. And while human connection can be desirable, it's also a potential avenue for even more pain and even more suffering down the road. And this is a nice segue to our main character, Francis Orme. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, Francis is another tenant of Observatory Mansions. In fact, it's his family, the Orme family, that owned Tirsham Park before it was converted to an apartment block. Francis has a quirk of his own, and it's the fact that he always has to be wearing white gloves. If the gloves get too dingy, he has to constantly replace them. He can't stand the idea of people seeing his hands or having skin-on-skin contact with another person. So he always has to be wearing white gloves. He doesn't even consider his hands to be alive unless there are white gloves on it. The white gloves act as a way to separate himself, not only just physically from other people, but in general. In a way, the white gloves allow him to feel he's separate from the rest of humanity, so that he's just an observer, because he does see that the world is ugly and messy, and if I could just step away from it, just observe it, not come into contact with it, I won't get hurt. Despite all of this, Francis does have that desire for human connection and to understand love, and the means he has to do this sort of thing is through his museum, his exhibition. So deep in a hidden part of the cellar of Observatory Mansions is this hidden tunnel where Francis keeps his exhibition of love. And these are a collection of nearly 1,000 seemingly random items that he has stolen and hoarded away from other people. These items were all once beloved by their previous owners, and Francis believes that by keeping these items, he can come to understand love. And it's just another tragedy within this book filled with tragedies, the fact that rather than attempting connection with other people, he thinks that an object is a proper substitute. And this longing for human connection is not something that is unique to Observatory Mansions. When you're reading the book and you venture out into the city, you do come across characters that also struggle with this. For instance, there is a man who Francis Orme comes across who has a hard time verbally communicating with other people. So what he ends up doing is just spray painting on the walls. There's a woman who is trying to capture the life of the city, and she's constantly taking pictures of other people. There's a man that stands outside the park, and he has weighing scales and offers to, weigh people, and he writes them all down, like little attempts to know others or be known. And so this is a problem that is more universal, and it's not just limited to, a group of individuals in this one apartment block. Observatory Mansions is a book that is steeped with loss. Whether this is the loss of a loved one, maybe this is a loss of a tenant that has just moved out, or maybe this is the loss of a way of life. I've noticed a lot when it comes to, especially stories written by British authors, there's this theme of the slow death or the slow phasing out of the old guard. And what I mean by this is that, you have these noble, wealthy, families that as time marches forward, as the modern era encroaches, they slowly find themselves becoming obsolete. First the servants have to be dismissed, then all the family possessions have to be sold off, and then eventually the house itself has to be sold. Or in the case of Tirsham Park, it has to be, split up into flats and be turned into an apartment building. And there is this sense of tragedy for those who are born into the system, born into a legacy, and then raised to cultivate this legacy so that it could pass on to another generation. But then you ask, what happens when there is nothing left to pass on? And it really does feel like this breed is going extinct. And in this book, you do see the sort of death of a certain generation. Now, with regards to the book's style and format, Observatory Mansions does have a stream of consciousness type of style to it, especially considering that we are following the perspective of Francis Orme. There are also no quotation marks here. So if that's something that bothers you, I'm just letting you know that. I personally had no trouble discerning who was talking to who, but as I mentioned, just wanted to inform you. This also happens to be a very character-driven book. So there really isn't this high-octane plot that is driving the story. This is a story of characters. And if you're not interested in these characters, if you're not interested, to learn more about them, to see what happens to them, yeah, this book may not be for you. That being said, this book was a huge hit for me, and I can definitely see Observatory Mansions being on my list of favorite books of 2025. I definitely look forward to reading more from Edward Carey for sure. It is a peculiar novel, not just because of the characters and at times the tone. It can also be a bit humorous, but don't be mistaken. This is a book that is honest and it's sincere in its portrayal of its characters. This book plainly displays the various disappointments that can and will plague our lives, but at the same time emphasizes that keen longing we have, to be known and to know others, that keen longing that still remains, despite the despair, despite the tragedy. So yeah, thank you very much for sticking around and listening to my review and discussion on Observatory Mansions. I know only one other video that talks about this book, and I definitely think that it deserves more buzz for sure. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!